much indeed, Mr Bercow. And I'd first of all like to start just by congratulating the committee on producing such a well-researched and thought-through report. It clearly is the product of a significant number of hours in evidence sessions, both here in Westminster and indeed in far-flung locations in the middle of oceans around the world. I'd also like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Ilford South in introducing the debate. Obviously, by definition, almost a very wide-ranging debate that we have had. And I think it's perhaps one of the first occasions where I've seen such a direct government action as a result of a Select Committee report. Now, often Select Committees are influential in government, and over time governments will eventually adopt some of the recommendations, but to actually launch an inquiry into the Turks and Caicos Islands within days of the publication of the report, I think does speak volumes to the standard of work that was produced and the level of evidence that was submitted. And even if this hasn't been acknowledged by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office themselves, although it may well be that changes today, but certainly I think others in the House can certainly see the value of that having happened. The territories of the overseas territories are, by their definition, varied, facing different challenges, and in fact in meetings I have had with representatives of some of those territories, I've been struck by just how different life is when you're living on a small island community with perhaps just a few thousand residents in the whole place. And obviously, while family life can go on as normal, when it comes to issues of governance in a small area, which I think, as somebody reminded us, in some cases can be as small as a council ward, then there are certain challenges. Indeed, the remote location of a lot of these territories provides challenges when it comes to things that many of us take for granted, like secondary education or further or higher education, where rather than sort of going away to university perhaps a couple of hundred miles away from home, you end up flying halfway around the world. So there are specific challenges for the British citizens living in these territories, and it's right that this House should address those. And I think today, Mr Bercow, we've had a range of excellent speeches from honourable members from all sides of the House. It's a particular pleasure for me to follow my honourable friend, the member for Colchester, who certainly made a very compelling case about the need for the airport to go ahead without delay in St Helena, and the interesting coincidence with the patron saint, St Helena of Colchester. I hope to focus my remarks because obviously this is a very large report, and I would rather focus on a few key areas on Diego Garcia, tax havens, the environment, and the issue of witness protection. But there's just a couple of other points I wanted to pick up that have been made in the debate. Recommendation 23 of the report, which is the one relating to equality in gender and sexual orientation, has been raised by various members today, and I think it is one that in a sense, when you read it, you suddenly think, well, hang on a second, these are British territories, and yet you assume that these basic provisions of gender equality and sexual orientation equality will exist. And to not just read that they don't exist, but there has actually been some hesitation and reluctance for those being actually adopted, to the extent that in the Caribbean, I think it was, the government had to put through the equality legislation itself in terms of sexual orientation. It is really quite staggering. And this does need to be addressed as a matter of urgency, and I think, as was mentioned in an intervention earlier, it's surely a basic issue of human rights, and the government does have within its own territory that responsibility to act. Another small but important and symbolic issue that was raised in recommendation 15 of the report is that of the laying of wreaths at the cenotaph. And it just seems to me absolutely nonsensical that if a territory wants to lay a wreath, that they should not be allowed to do so. I mean, well, we don't want to force them, and if they'd rather that is done on their behalf generally, then that should be okay. But I just fail to see what the problem is and why this can't just be dealt with in a very swift succession by the government just saying, yes, absolutely, we will change the procedures and this will happen from this coming November. Finally, I'd also, before moving on to the sort of key issues of my contribution, I would like to just pick up the recommendation 21 of the report, which is relating to freedom of information legislation and encouraging the overseas territories to adopt it. I very much welcome this recommendation from the committee. I'm a firm believer in freedom of information legislation, and it's good that the government did introduce that in this House, although I do believe that the legislation introduced in Scotland is superior and better and enables more accountability, but it is a start, and indeed we've already seen how that has been used to create more transparency within government, which can only be a good thing. And I have to say I do welcome the government's response to say that they will actually encourage overseas territories to adopt such legislation, and I would welcome the Minister's comments if she's able to address that in terms of how often and how this encouragement is actually taking place. Turning, Mr Bercow, to the issue of Diego Garcia, and there's obviously two related issues here. Firstly, looking at the issue of extraordinary rendition, it's quite right that the report deplores the use of this UK territory for the fuelling for extraordinary rendition, and indeed, as reports would have us believe, as a CIA black site for interrogation of suspects. And indeed there is significant evidence to suggest that this is actually having been the case. There was a Council of Europe report in June 2007 which concluded, "We have received concurring confirmations that United States agencies have used the island territory of Diego Garcia, which is in the international legal responsibility of the United Kingdom, in the processing of high-value detainees. It is true that the UK government has readily accepted assurances from US authorities to the contrary, without ever independently or transparently inquiring into the allegations itself or accounting to the public in a sufficiently thorough manner." I have to say, I think that conclusion is quite a damning one, and indeed the word processing in inverted commas is one of the most appalling euphemisms that I've come across in terms of the kind of torture that is lying behind that word. Clearly, just receiving assurances from the United States is not good enough. I don't believe that's good enough for this House or indeed for the constituents that we represent, particularly when that is viewed in the context of previous assurances from the United States that no extraordinary rendition flights passed through UK territory or refuelled. Then subsequently the US came back to say that indeed two had done so. So while it is very welcome that the Foreign Affairs Select Committee will indeed be conducting an inquiry into torture complicity allegations, and indeed my party has long called for an independent inquiry into this, a select committee inquiry should not be the only thing that is happening, and it should not just be left to a select committee to do this. The UK government itself ought to be investigating in detail the allegations that have been made, and not just relying on the US, who, as we've seen, have already been seen not to tell us the entire truth about this on at least one occasion. It is good news that the Foreign Secretary has said that he will cooperate fully with this new Foreign Affairs Select Committee inquiry, because it was obviously very regrettable that he refused to appear before the Joint Committee on Human Rights to discuss these issues when they had an inquiry earlier last year. So I think it will be very helpful that he does appear, and I do hope that the members of the Select Committee, as I'm sure they will be robust in their questioning. In January, the new president, who we all have so much hope for, announced plans to close down these very black sites that we suspect may be in operation on Diego Garcia. And of course it will be interesting to see how this progresses, and I hope the Minister will be doing all she can to encourage that process happening across the world, and in particular where it actually might be the case that it is on a UK territory. Turning to the issue of the Chagos Islanders, which is of course the other big controversial issue on Diego Garcia, there's been obviously already in this debate various eloquent contributions about this from my honourable friend from St Ives in an earlier intervention, and indeed from the members of the all-party group for Islington North and Rosendale, Romford, on that particular issue. Obviously, the report says there's a strong moral case for the return of the islanders, and I fail really to see how anybody can seriously argue against that moral imperative. I think the government has behaved pretty shamefully on this matter. The great and late, sadly, Robin Cook, when he was Foreign Secretary, actually promised that he would not appeal the decision of the Court of Appeal. But indeed, we now find in this report that at least £2 million has actually been spent. £2 million of our taxpayers' money has actually been spent on those appeals. And clearly, this is something where I think the Foreign Office does need to just put its hands up and say we got this wrong and act accordingly. The reasons for why the Chagosinians cannot return seem to me to be patchy. Security seems to be one of these main reasons which is given, but the place where they're actually wanting to settle are about 135 miles from the naval base that the US actually have. And, any boat is allowed to pass freely within 3 miles of Diego Garcia. I mean, this rather suggests that, if you can take a boat there and moor your yacht, then and that's not seen as a security threat, then why is there this threat of people just wanting to return to their homeland and live an ordinary life? So I do hope the Minister will have some happy news on that issue, but I'm not going to hold my breath in this particular debate. Turning to financial issues, which obviously in these territories are of huge importance, the report focuses strongly on money laundering, although, of course, a lot of recent political attention has been focused on the issue of tax avoidance. And it seems to me that we really, when we have a Prime Minister who is enjoying grandstanding on the international stage on financial issues, that we really need to get our own house in order when it comes to issues of tax avoidance. And I think the Right Honourable Member for Tonbridge and Malling really put the issue incredibly well when he made the contribution and pointed out that 7 of these British territories have actually been named and shamed at the G20 by the OECD as its list of countries who have not agreed to or implemented its international tax standards. This is an appalling situation and should not be tolerated, particularly when in some of these territories it's actually the UK that's directly responsible for financial regulation. So it seems to me that certainly in some of them there is absolutely no barrier to reform because the government is actually in a position to be able to implement it. And indeed, in the other areas, then pressure does need to be applied to make sure that we do live up to international standards. And I think that the allegations in the report that the FCO has been complacent in this, I think, can really speak from the evidence that if 7 of our territories are still on this grey list, then there certainly has not been the action that has been required. While looking at the issue of tax avoidance, I think it is also important for the FCO, in collaboration with the individual governors of the territories, to consider how to develop the economy in other ways, because we do need to recognise that for a lot of these territories that the revenue and the income that they've received from financial services actually forms a large part of their economy. And in moving away from tax avoidance, then clearly that will have an impact on those economies, and so support will need to be given to develop other economic avenues that are perhaps less shady and internationally embarrassing. I'd just like to turn to the environmental issue, and the Foreign Affairs Select Committee report also has considered reports of a Select Committee that I sit on, the Environmental Audit Select Committee, and I'm very pleased that they agreed with our recommendations in the 2 previous reports about the biodiversity and the environmental sort of legacy that we have and the amazing resources that there are, whether it's in flora or fauna in these territories, often very remote places which have unique ecosystems not replicated elsewhere, and indeed very fragile ecosystems. Now, since the Select Committee report was published, the Environmental Audit Committee has published a further report on biodiversity, and unfortunately the situation does not seem to be much better in terms of our own progress and record in making sure that the biodiversity in these areas is not being lost at an alarming rate, and particularly when there's many endangered species to be considered, this is an issue of great concern. The government response, I think, rather helpfully stated that there is an interdepartmental ministerial group on biodiversity, which, when my select committee looked at this issue, hadn't exactly got a great track record for meeting and acting on the issue. But it did say that the next meeting of this group would look into the feasibility of carrying out a full strategic assessment of the overseas territories' needs. And I wonder if the Minister might be able to update us, given that their response was published in September 2008, that presumably this meeting has such taken place, and that feasibility and strategic assessment might indeed be well underway. So an update on that would certainly be helpful. And just finally, Mr Burke, turning to the issue of witness protection and what has happened in particular in TCI, it was really quite stunning to hear the tales of the Select Committee members receiving evidence from people who were too scared to put their name to what they were saying about what was happening in terms of corruption, and indeed the leader of the opposition in the TCI talking of a general atmosphere of fear and intimidation. I mean, this is clearly just unacceptable, and something which I think the committee is to be commended on, actually managing to secure evidence and treat people in a sensitive and confidential manner, but obviously not something we would want to see continuing in terms of an environment. Now, obviously the government has acted on the issues in the TCI, but I think it does raise a wider issue of witness protection, and there is some information that some territories in the Caribbean were working together on a justice protection bill, which would then give effect to an inter-territory witness protection scheme. And I wonder what progress might have been made on that so far. But it seems to me, Mr Burke, and this report exemplifies it, that the work of select committees is a vital part of what happens in the House. It's so important to the scrutiny of government and indeed to the quality of debate and ensuring that members are well informed. And so witnesses must, and particularly British citizens, must at all times be free to talk openly and honestly to members of Parliament. And without that kind of frank evidence, then select committees can't continue to function in the way that they do. So I think that's a particularly appropriate point to end on, and hope that the government will be able to point to some progress so that this is a situation which does not arise again.
It's